Welcome to Gospel Truth with Andrew Wommack, celebrating 50 years of sharing God's unconditional love and grace.
Welcome to the Gospel Truth broadcast.
Welcome to a very special edition of the Gospel Truth. If you honor God, God will honor you. If you are born again and you have God on your side, you are the winner. If you will just trust in God, God will help you to kill your giants. This is Lessons from David. Welcome to our Monday's broadcast of the Gospel Truth. Today I'm continuing to teach through a book that I've entitled Lessons from David, How to Be a Giant Killer. I've already spent 2 weeks on this. This is the beginning of my third week, and we've got a lot of material. I've got a book in English and in Spanish. We've got a study guide, and then we've got CDs and DVDs, and we're actually giving this book to you as our gift. Now, we always say that it's available for a gift of any amount, and there's a lot of people that take advantage of that and don't send anything. But this time we're just encouraging you just to get this as our gift to you. I believe it will bless your life. Now, as I said, I've already spent 2 weeks on this, and I've covered so much material I can't go back through it. The last thing we were talking about is how David fought Goliath. And man, there were just so many great lessons in that. What I want to do on this teaching is to contrast three kings. I want to contrast Saul, who was the predecessor of David, and then of course David, and then David's son Absalom, who for a brief period of time claimed to be king and actually tried to overthrow his father's kingdom and kill him. And there is a contrast between these that is just significant, and I don't think that we would get the full impact of what David's life is all about if we don't see the different ways that these men operated. So I'm going to be talking about 4 major differences between these 3 kings, and we're going to be identifying what it is that made David a man after God's own heart. In 1 Samuel chapter 13, I've already used these verses previously in this series, but it says here in verse 14, "But now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart, and the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee." This was the prophet Samuel talking to Saul, the previous king, and he said that he had sought him a man after God's own heart. And I went through this last time, but David wasn't born until 8 years after this. And yet the Lord put all of this in the past tense. And one of the points that I was making was that David was born with a purpose. God had sought him, and before he was even born, God already had a plan for his life. And I made a direct application of that to you and me. The Scripture says that in the first chapter of Jeremiah, also in the second chapter of Galatians. In Psalms 139, the Scripture talks about before even all of our parts were formed in our mother's belly, that God had already written them in a book. And so God has a purpose for us, and God had a purpose for David. What I want to do is identify 4 things that made David a man after God's own heart. And in a way, these are just 4 different characteristics of one thing. It's like light. Did you know light, you look at it and it's just light, but you can take a prism and you can break that into all of these different colors, this entire spectrum. All of these different colors are in light. Well, likewise, I'm going to be talking about what makes us a man or a woman after God's own heart. And in a sense, these are just describing the same thing, but it's just for the purpose of identification. It will help us identify with it. So first of all, this may sound redundant to you. I don't know how to say this any better. But when you're talking about being a man or woman after God's own heart, you have to have a heart for God. Now, again, it could probably be said better than that, but what I mean by this is that your heart has to be sensitive to God. Your heart has to long for God. You have to have a personal relationship with God. It's all about a heart matter, and it's amazing to me how many people don't live on this heart level. They are performance-oriented, they're goal-oriented, task-oriented, and they're constantly out doing things. And their whole life is about doing. But the truth is, we are human beings, not human doings. And if we would do it God's way, first of all, our heart gets established. And once your heart is seeking God properly, well then out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, is what Jesus said. It also says that as a man thinks in his heart, so is he, Proverbs 23:7. The way that God's kingdom is meant to work is that you establish your heart. You set your heart on the things of God. And you seek God with all of your heart. And once you do that, then actions are a byproduct of your heart. If you can get your heart established, then actions will not be a problem. Now, please do not misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not saying that a person that has a heart for God, that is a man or a woman after God's own heart, that you will always do everything right. That certainly is not the case. We fail just because we're human. We fail because we live in a fallen world. We fail sometimes because we don't know what to do and we lean unto our own understanding. We don't seek God the way we should. I am not saying that a person with a heart after God is going to be perfect in their actions. David right here, it was talking about him being a man after God's own heart, and yet David committed adultery and actually murdered trying to cover up his adultery. So we can see by the fact the only person in Scripture, the Old Testament, that was called a man after God's own heart was a man who committed adultery and murder. It does not mean that your actions are perfect, but it does mean that your heart, you long for the things of God. You have a personal relationship with God. You are sensitive to God. You are seeking God. And yet I meet people all of the time that their heart isn't right. They're trying to get their actions right. And they're trying to do what's right, but their heart's wrong. And I'm not perfect at this by any stretch of the imagination. I'm dealing with some things just now in the last day or two that have come up that I'm having to deal with some people, and they are saying the right things. They want to do what we want them to do, but their heart isn't right. And so as I've been talking to the person who's a supervisor and over these people and things like that, we've been discussing what do we do. And you know what? You can sit there and they will do what you tell them to do. But their heart isn't in it. They just don't have our DNA. They don't have our heart for doing things. And as a result, I was just talking to their manager last night and saying that, you know what, if we continue to work with this person, you are going to have to be managing everything. They have to be told what to do. They don't have the heart for what we are trying to accomplish in our ministry. I hope you understand what I'm saying. And see, there's a lot of people that just, it's all about performance. And if you were to criticize them and say, well, you didn't do that, well, I did this, they are looking at their performance and they think their performance is acceptable. But it's not just a performance thing, it's a heart thing. I need people around me who have my heart, who have my DNA, to be able to represent me and do the things that I'm wanting them to do. You can get a robot to do some things, but it just doesn't have the heart to it. I feel like I'm struggling a little bit to get that point across. Let me give you an illustration that I had an employee way back in the beginning of our ministry. And this employee, he came in and he set up some things that we're still doing today. And I mean, he was a great asset, just a wonderful person, had a tremendous testimony. His life had been changed, and he was just doing a great, great job. And he worked for me for years. But after a couple of years being on the job, all of a sudden things just changed. And he got to where he wasn't coming into work on time. He was taking an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours off for lunch. I found out one time that he was actually going and getting a haircut during the working hours. And some of his work wasn't getting done. And so anyway, I talked to him about it, and it just continued to go on. And so finally it came to a point where I felt like something needed to be done. And my first reaction was to get in and just deal with him based 100% on his actions. Tell him his actions are not acceptable. If you don't shape up, you're out of here. And I was just going to deal with him based on his actions. But as I prayed about it, the Lord just reminded me that for years he had been a great employee. I paid him for 40 hours. He would work 45 or 50 or whatever it took to get the job done. He had just been a stellar employee. And anyway, the Lord showed me that his heart was right. And right now his performance wasn't good, but I didn't understand what it was. So rather than go in and just deal with him based on performance only, I went in and talked to him and I said, look, you have just been a great friend. You've been a great employee. You've given me more than what I've paid you for. In the past, it's been great. But lately, and then I showed his actions, how he was getting haircuts, taking longer lunch, coming in late, leaving early, etc. I said, I just want to know what's happened. Is there something wrong? Because this is inconsistent with your heart that I've seen. You aren't acting the way that you have in the past. And anyway, he never did open up to me. He never did tell me what the problem was. I asked him, I said, what's going on? Why are you doing this? He wouldn't share that with me, but he did admit, he says, you are absolutely right. He says, I'm letting my own personal things get in the way, and he says, you will never have another problem out of me. And I never did. I mean, he just completely straightened up. Everything was fine after that. And he never did tell me exactly what happened, but he and his wife, his family moved away a few years later, and anyway, they wound up getting a divorce. And I'm just supposing, but since he said it was a personal problem, I believe he was probably having some marital problems, and he was just struggling. It was hard for him to keep his mind on the work and stuff, and he let his personal problems affect him, but his heart was right. He was just under pressure. He was under duress. And if I would have gone in and have just dealt with him solely on actions, I think that would have been the wrong thing. Because when I talked to him on a heart level and said, this is not who you are, this is inconsistent with what your heart is, well, immediately he just straightened up, and I never had another problem out of him. He was a total asset to me. And see, I think that a lot of times, especially managers, just deal with things on a performance level. You do this, and if you don't do this, well, then you get dealt with. And again, I'm not saying that we ignore actions. Again, Proverbs 23:7 says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Your actions are an outgrowth. It is a fruit or a result of where your heart is. And so I don't think that you can just totally separate a person's actions from their heart, but there is not a one-to-one ratio. It's not 100%. Everything you do is exactly as you feel in your heart. That's just not true. There's times that, we desire to do what's right and we don't have the skill sets. We aren't giving enough attention to it or something like that, and through neglect we make mistakes. We don't prepare. And so anyway, there's not a perfect ratio between our heart and our actions, but there is a relationship. You don't ignore actions. You do have to hold people accountable for their actions. And again, with David, we are going to see this, that David was held accountable by God for his actions. And yet, David still had a heart for God, even though he got way, way off. And when he was confronted with this, he repented. So here's 4 things I'm going to be talking about. First of all, we have to have a heart for God. That's what I've been talking about today. We got to establish our heart in the things of God. We've got to be humble before God, which is a trait of having a man or woman after God's own heart. And I'm going to be explaining that as I talk about humility, there's a lot of different ways that you can discuss it, but I'm going to be specifically talking about that you have to accept responsibility for your mistakes, for your actions. A person after God's own heart will humble themselves and accept responsibility and not blame somebody else. A person with a heart for God will be a God pleaser and not a man pleaser. Boy, you can see this in David. This was one of his great traits and one of the things I believe that made him a man after God's own heart. And then the 4th thing is you got to have a cause that is bigger than yourself. You've got to be willing to sacrifice yourself for something that's bigger than you. If you're all wrapped up in yourself, you make a very small package. And sad to say, this is where most people live today. And so these things are in short supply in our world today, and that's the reason that there's very few people that you can truthfully say they are a man or a woman after God's own heart. And let me say that our heart is not something that you are just born with a perfect heart. You have to cultivate this. Human nature is contrary to having a heart for God. You know, in Jeremiah chapter 17, I believe it's verse 9, it says, "The heart is evil above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it?" The Scriptures teach that we were born in sin. David said that in Psalms chapter 51. In Romans chapter 5, the Scripture just talks about how through one man sin entered into the world, and we have all lived in sin. Ephesians chapter 2 talks about that we are by nature the children of wrath, even as others. There is a belief in the world today that people are at their core basically good. The Bible teaches that people at their core are basically bad, that we were born with a sin nature. And if left to yourself, it is all going to be about you, and you are going to just naturally gravitate towards being selfish, being mean, angry, all of these kind of things. To have a heart after God does not come natural, is what I'm trying to say. You have to cultivate a heart for God. And it begins with this first thing that I'm talking about, that a man or a woman after God's own heart is a person that has a personal relationship with God, that loves God on an intimate, close, personal basis. And I tell you, this is missing in so many people. There's people that their heart isn't right, and yet they're wanting their actions to be right. That's conflict. That's turmoil. This is why some people see it so hard to serve God. It's because they don't have a heart for God. They actually are lusting after all of these other things. They are just filling themselves with all of the stuff that the world has to offer. They aren't in love with God. They don't have this intimacy with God, and yet they want to be a man or a woman after God's own heart. They want to be a person who does the right thing, but they don't have a heart for God. It all begins on a personal basis. You know, I just recently taught on how to find, follow, and fulfill God's will. And if you saw that, this is one of the major points I made. I'll just mention this in passing, but I was seeking to know what God's will for my life was. I wanted to know what to do. And the Lord spoke to me, Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. It says, "I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." Now see, what I wanted to know was what God's will for my life was. So when I saw that last phrase in the second verse where it says, "You will prove the good, acceptable, and perfect will of God," man, I just honed in on that and I said, all right, here's the key. So I went back to verse 1 and 2 and looked at it. And just to boil it down to its simplest terms, the Lord told me what He wanted me to do was secondary. It was about who He wanted me to be that was primary. God wanted me to be a living sacrifice. God wanted me to know Him intimately. God wanted me to be completely, totally committed to Him. You could say it this way, that God wanted to change my heart first. And if He ever got my heart established, then my actions would just be a byproduct of that. And see, this is what I'm trying to say, that there's so many people that they don't have a heart for God. They want to live for God. They want the results that God has. They aren't evil in the sense that they are just out to rebel at God and they don't care what God says, but they haven't gone to the place to where they have this intimacy and this relationship with God. And so it's all about just trying to do the right things, but their heart's not right. You know, if God ever gets a person's heart, He will get their money, He will get their service, He will get everything that they've got. But there's a lot of people that are, that are offering God their service and, oh God, I'll go serve you and I'll do this. But their heart's not right. And The Scripture says that the heart knows his own bitterness, and a stranger intermeddleth not therewith. In other words, you know, if you would just be honest, is it all about you and doing your thing and stuff, and you want to please God, but you don't have a heart for God? You know in your heart whether you are really seeking God, whether you have put God first in your life. I believe that every one of us knows that. And if you can't answer this affirmatively and say that, I really want God more than anything else. I want relationship with God more than I want all of these things, more than I want all of my needs met, more than I want fame, more than I want to have trophies and awards on a shelf and stuff like this. It's not about you. It's all about God. You know whether you have really put God first in your heart. And if you haven't done that, if God isn't number one in your life, then you don't need to look any further than that when you are wanting to be a man or a woman after God's own heart. It starts with you just having an intimate relationship with the Lord, being a living sacrifice, and just giving yourself totally over to God. And if you've never done that, there is no way that you are ever going to see everything that you desire in your life come to pass. It starts on a heart level. Jesus said it this way when He was talking to the scribes and the Pharisees in Matthew chapter 23. He says, you make clean the outside of the cup and the platter, but inside there's all of this corruption. You are like a whited sepulcher, and you paint the outside of the tomb, but inside there is just full of dead men's bones and rottenness and decay. And this is the way that so many people live their life. They're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to look good. They're trying to be accepted. You may work in your church. You may do all of these things. But how is your personal relationship with the Lord? How much time do you spend directly with the Lord? Is it all about doing something for God, or is it all about being a living sacrifice and knowing Him personally? If you put the emphasis on the heart things, well then, as a man thinks in his heart, that's the way that your life will go. Again, it's not perfect. You'll make mistakes along the way, but your life will go the direction of your dominant thoughts in your heart. And if your heart is for God, you can get off the rails, you can make mistakes, but I can guarantee you, overall, your life will be headed in the right direction if you get your heart right with God. And man, this is one of the things that is missing in our religious culture today. There are people that are being told you go to church, you pay your tithes, you do this, this, and this, and you do certain things and God will accept you. It's all about a heart issue. And if you would just come to the Lord and give Him your heart and say, God, I want to know You. I want to have a heart relationship with You. If you ever experience God on that heart level, your actions will just change automatically. It'll be effortless change. And so this is what we're beginning to talk about. I'm going to contrast these three kings. Today was just an introduction, but we're going to be showing you the difference between them, and it's on a heart level, and it affected their actions. But if you want to be a man or a woman after God's own heart, these are four things that you need to evaluate. And remember, it doesn't just come naturally. You have to pursue this. It takes effort to develop a heart after God. So we've got all of this in this teaching on lessons from David. This is now the third week of my teaching. We are offering this book, also the Spanish book. We've got a study guide, we've got CDs and DVDs, and we've just got a lot of material. I tell you, it's better to learn these things at David's expense than it is at your expense. So listen to our announcer as he gives you all the information, and then please call or write today.
You can get Andrew's Lessons from David book in either English or Spanish today absolutely free as a special website offer when you go to awmi.net. This offer is limited to one free book per household and is only available in the US, UK, Canada, and Australia. This teaching is also available in a study guide, a CD album, or in a DVD album made from our daily television broadcast. Each of these resources is available for a gift of any amount. The third audio teaching in today's series is available for a gift of any amount when you write or call. We encourage everyone to give, but if you're simply unable to afford it, Andrew and his partners will provide this third CD free of charge. We want to say a special thank you to the grace partners of Andrew Wommack Ministries. Your gifts make it possible to put free ministry materials into the hands of many people in need. If you're not already a grace partner, we ask you to pray about becoming one today. You can become a grace partner or order resources through our website at awmi.net. While there, you can discover more product details and download many free resources. Or call our helpline Monday through Friday from 4:30 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Our helpline number is 719-635-1111. If the lines are busy, remember you can order ministry materials or become a grace partner 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at awmi.net. To write us, use the address on your screen. We appreciate your generosity and hope to hear from you today.
The weekend of November 3rd is a celebration and dedication of the new auditorium of Cary's Bible College. As part of that celebration, we are premiering a brand new biblical stage musical, David, the man after God's own heart, recounting the story of a unique man who is one of the most epic personalities of the Bible. Witness how the rejected shepherd boy from Bethlehem becomes the king of Jerusalem.
The following video is an excerpt from our latest construction update, where Andrew gives a tour of the finishing touches to the Phase 2 building. To see the full video, visit awmi.net/construction update.
We are that close to having this completely done. I'm standing here in front of our waterfall. This is the very first time that we've had it functional, and it has turned out just exactly the way I wanted it to. It's awesome. We've now got the floor totally exposed. Now it's still got to be dusted. It's not finalized, but it really looks nice. And we've got in our furniture. Now the furniture is it's still coming in. We've got some furniture that's been boxed down there that's not unboxed. So we'll go in here to the auditorium. Okay, so now we've just about got everything in the auditorium done. So all of these seats in the bottom now are installed. The ones down here on the bottom level all have this writing tablet. And this is for a handicap spot here. Also along the aisles, each one of them have a little light in the seat. So this will give you a little idea of some of our parking garage. These are precast panels. We've got a total of 984 precast panels. These are poured down in Colorado Springs, and then they're trucked up here, and then this crane picks these panels up and puts them up. That is the top level of the parking garage, 5 levels. Then there's the 4th level right here, what you're looking at. This is the 3rd level. Thank you for being a part of it, and for sure, the next construction update, we will be in this building. God bless you.
Thank you, partners, for supporting Andrew in his efforts to complete the construction of the Phase 2 building. To see the full video, visit awmi.net/construction update.